Lovely. Okay. Moving on to Daniel's question. To Jason, why did you choose Patreon over your own school? And to Colin, why did you choose your own school over Patreon? Jason, you
Okay.
first.
I did Patreon simply because there's absolutely not enough hours in the day for me to build these very in-depth websites, my own website, and to host my own videos on there as well. Patreon is absolutely not ideal way to run a kind of like an art channel, but it's by far the easiest way to run it, where they can take care of a lot of all that headache for me and give me the time then, because I haven't got a tech guru son working for me and helping me along and doing all of that yet. Then I just haven't got the time to do that, and to find a company that can do that for me to the way I want it done as well. It's so difficult that's why for now I've gone down the Patreon route.
Mm. Yeah, and I think for us, I mean, we didn't hear about Patreon. I don't think I didn't hear about Patreon for a long time. And the only reason we went down our route was it was 2011. It may have been a year before, but 2011-ish time. I think I said to you, this YouTube channel you're doing is getting quite popular. Maybe we could extend it and come up with some bigger lessons. And it was only my background in IT that sort of led me to say, I'll build it and we'll work on it and I'll create something. And it evolved from there in terms of that. So it's purely just down to really just having what's at your disposal and
exactly
the time
right,
that you had to do it. So
exactly.
I mean, I think by the time we heard about Patreon, it was too late. We'd already been set up for a few years, and I thought, well, there's no point for us to do it.
No, exactly right.
Okay, so let's move on to Louise's question. It's in a few different parts, so I'm going to sort of tackle these one at a time, guys. Louise asks, where do you think the future lies for animal art? And do you think the sales market has disappeared? So what's kind of your impression? I mean, Dad, you're less involved in that world now of selling work and doing an animal art for people, but you did that for a number of years. What do you think about this, Jason?
I started off being a professional animal artist, so all my income was from selling paintings. They was going really successful. I wasn't the thing people think about when you're going to be a pet portrait artist or an animal artist or something like that, very often to earn a living, you're not actually drawing and painting what you want to paint. And back then, to earn a living, it was tiger after tiger after tiger. That's what people wanted all the time. And I burnt out on that. I didn't want to do that. But I was earning good money from it. Selling work was really easy. You could sell originals on eBay every single time they'd sell. And then two things happened. We had the market crash. And then overnight, I went from selling at a top of a couple of thousand, and then all of a sudden, literally overnight, my best work would be £100 or £200. So that happened then. And also roughly at the same time, the Chinese, what we would call sweatshop art studios, seemed to flourish. And they was ripping images off every artist, loads of my images. And you'd see photos of them in these big rooms, desk after desk, and they just knocking out kind of like a Bob Ross fashion, all these paintings and flooding eBay with it. That happened at the same time. So couldn't really sell my work on eBay anymore because I couldn't get any money. Couldn't sell it really in the galleries because the market had dropped completely. And I don't think that's ever recovered from that. I know if you're one of the top artists, and it doesn't really mean that you're the best, but if you've got a really top name and people are paying expensive amounts for it, this hasn't really affected those. It's affected the more middle of the range and lower levels of artists. So to be a wildlife artist, it's extremely difficult to make a living from that. You'd have to really start doing the shows in the States and putting a lot into your advertising. To be a pet portrait artist, there's so much competition out there now doing that. Everybody seems to want to do that, but I've never really wanted to do cats, dogs, and horses myself. And I think to be happy, you've got to kind of do what you want to do anyway, because then you're not really working. If you are doing dog after dog after dog and you're not interested in dogs, I might as well be working in a factory that way. So it's really tricky now these last 20 years to do that type of thing. So that's my view on that. It's a bit negative, but I'd rather be honest with people, and that's what I've seen over the last couple of decades happen, really.
What's your impression, Dad, now? Like, do you have like any idea of what the landscape's like for a pet portrait artist or an animal artist?
Well, we can only go by from, we don't sell, I don't sell my work, really.
Neither do I. I got out of that game completely.
So it doesn't really come into our frame, but a lot of our, and I'm sure a lot of Jason's people that follow him are selling their work.
Exactly.
And that seems to be flourishing. Now, the reason for that is that they don't ask very high prices. You know, people doing done our courses and think, well, I'm going to sell my dog, or I'm going to do a commission of this cat or dog or whatever. And the people will readily pay, you know, a reasonable amount without being silly for that, their own particular dog. So that side of the business, I think, is always going to be quite successful. But from a professional point of view, and that's I agree with Jason. Totally, there's no money in that. We're very fortunate that we've managed to make a living at helping other people.
Exactly.
A leisure point of view, because that's how we work. We want people to do it because they enjoy doing it. It's something to do, something that's satisfying. Not so much that at the end of the day they're going to get money for it, because most of the time they're not.
Yeah, and I think we are fortunate in that Colin and myself came into this a long time ago. You know, I was starting to document my drawings 25 years ago and starting to sell my lessons 20 years ago. So when the internet was starting and when teaching of art, because Colin was one of the first ones where you buy his book and he does take you step by step all the way through from the very start to the very end without missing any steps, because he didn't keep any of these secrets, and that's what people liked. So he did it in his books and your pamphlets as well, and then onto your videos. And I did it through my ebooks and videos, not missing anything out. And people gained confidence in us that way, because we was one of the first ones that were doing that. So now 20 years on, we've gathered those people. They've followed, a lot of us have been followed by them for decades. So when we start our own art channel, or when we start a Patreon channel, it's not like we're starting from fresh. Like you see a lot of artists now, they think, well, I'm fantastic. I'm going to open a Patreon channel and the money's going to roll in and it's going to be great because I'm just going to be drawing for a couple of hours a day and sunbathing the rest of the time. We've put the work in over the decades doing this to make people confident in our abilities. And it's like just building up like your newsletter, basically. So I think we were both fortunate to do that way back then before there was tons of competition as there are now. You know, it's really difficult to get your head seen in today's market.
Yeah, and Louise goes on to talk about that, about the amount of competition. So we'll get to that one too. But just to quickly throw something in between those two, she adds, is realism now old-fashioned? And how does that apply to what we've just been talking about? What do you guys think?
Well, I think that the powers that be have always had an issue with realism lately. They always want to try and invent something new. But when you ask the general person on the street what they like, 99% of the time, I think they like realism and representational art. And that's why these programs that you see on TV, like Landscape Artist of the Year, people are dumbfounded usually by the people that get through because they just don't understand it. It doesn't look like anything. Whereas the portrait artists of the year, interestingly, going back to what Colin said about portraits, it's got to actually represent the person in some way. So the winners are usually really accurate. So I don't know why these art organizations have got a problem with realism when the general person really loves it and always has done since Stone Age man, who did realism, all the way through the Egyptians who did realism, and then all of a sudden they don't like it because they got something new to sell and to rope people in with. But I think, do what you love doing. If you don't like realism, do something else. If you like it, good on you. You know, personal preference.
What do you think, Dad?
I totally agree with that. I've always tried to represent the animals that I've done and the people I've done in a realistic way with a twist. I always try to put something in it that isn't in a photograph, for instance.
Yeah.
And I think we can do that. We've got the skill level to do that. And one of the things that you, and Jason, I'm sure will agree with, when you do the realistic tiger, dog, cat, person, and you put a background on, that's when you can really let rip. You don't put the posts and the pillars and all the other things in. You don't put that in. You make the background reflect what you see in the animal. The colours are usually represented too. So we can actually do our non-realism bit in a picture, but not in the actual features. Those have got to be accurate with, as I say, a little bit of artistic license here and there, but don't deviate too much.
I have a question for you, Dad, because you like a bit of Impressionism.
I do.
Would you say that Impressionism is old-fashioned?
Well, it depends how old you are, because in the middle of the 1800s, Impressionism came in. It wasn't before that. It wasn't. Everything was painted realistically, as Jason said. So it's only then. However, I do understand why the Impressionists did what they do or do what they do now. But even that, if you try to copy an Impressionist picture, you'd find it really difficult to do, because they had a structure. Even though it was Impressionism, they had a structure there, and they kept to that structure, even though it wasn't, as we've been talking, it wasn't realistic. So I do love Impressionism. I mean, to a certain extent, John Constable was an Impressionist, even though you would look at his picture. No, I can see that if you studied his pictures and went close, as I used to when I went to the National Gallery, right up close to his pictures.
Exactly.
This blob here, blob there. It's not really.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of misconception about Impressionism and realism. And I think we have to teach realism, really. We can't teach Impressionism.
Yeah.
We can teach realism because people can see and understand what is being put before them. You know, I can see that eye, I can see the light in the eye. But if you start playing around with that, it's not going to work.
Yeah, a lot of beginners, a mistake they make, this going off a little bit, but people may find it interesting, is that when they put in a different background, they'll put in something completely different color. So if you've got, say, a white dog that's on grass, they'll think, oh, I tell you what would look nice, put in a blue background.
Yes, I know.
You do that, and then on the white grass, the dog then, where you've got that bounce light coming under the chin that's all green from the grass and yellow, they leave that there, and then it doesn't work. So you've got to try and, you know, keep all those things in place. And funnily enough, recently on Patreon, I give people a choice for a challenge of 3 images. Now, it's coming to the end of the month, so I can say now that each one of those images I gave them to pick from, to create some art from, had something glaringly wrong with it, whether it's like a post coming out of the head or something like that. And it was an experiment for me, because I wanted to see who would copy it, who would put in the things that we could take out and make a substantially better piece of artwork. So to teach it as a lesson in that way, that we're not just trying to copy something as a realist artist. We've got the option then to make it better or to put our slant on it. I recently did a little black jaguar cub, and I completely did a different background, but I took into consideration all the elements of the light that was actually on the subject. So I made sure that background's color worked with it. And that's where I think they can take our techniques and then expand on that further. And if they want to go into more abstract or surrealism, like I said, once you know realism, you can then branch out from there.
Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Great, guys. So then just to finish off Louise's questions, she said, what are your thoughts on the growing number of wildlife artists switching to online tutorials to make a living? And this is where we were going, Jason, with you saying there's lots of people out there that are setting up Patreon channels, and your thoughts on that now?
Best of luck.
I was going to say that. Good luck.
That's the thing. I think if it's not dependent on how good an artist you are. I've seen some artists that are absolutely incredible artists, and as soon as I heard they was doing a Patreon channel, I thought that's going to explode with members. And after a couple of months, they've shut them down because they couldn't get any members. And I think it's due to trust and the fact that they haven't been around selling things for a long time, so people haven't got that confidence. So I'm not worried about that personally. As I said before, it's a big world. There should be enough room for everybody to do it. I used to be really competitive when I started, although I've never held anything back. I always wanted to be better and to push myself more and more all the time. And I still do that. But I think they need to take into consideration, they need a following, and a following that's buying from them. So if you've got a following on, say, Instagram, I saw a colored pencil artist and the person had hundreds of thousands of followers on there, but never really selling lessons or anything to them or selling original work. So there's no connection with the sale going on there. And that's where I think people make mistakes. They think they'll go onto Patreon. They know they're fantastic, and they are, but they can't make that change to making money. And if you're a professional artist, at the end of the day, we need to earn money to pay mortgage, rent, and food. So, that's my view on Patreon.
There is an element of the business side of art, isn't there?
Yeah.
You've got to have that sales. I mean, thankfully you were a salesman for however 20 years before you got into art, so you had all of that business background.
Well, quite, and it doesn't matter how many great artists there are out there. When they start to teach, can they teach? Are they able to teach? Are they able to communicate, which is what we do through our lessons? And people compliment us for that. Now, not every great artist is a teacher. And this is where probably the person that Jason was talking about fell down. If you can't teach, or you haven't got the right voice,
good point,
voice is important.
Yeah, good point.
And if you're patronizing and this sort of thing, and big-headed, and your ego comes out, and unfortunately, that people see that, and they don't like that. They just want to be shown in the simplest possible terms how you think, how you're doing it, and watching you do it. And if you can get that across, then you're going to succeed.
I think it's very important, and it's definitely, because I've watched a few of your videos, Colin, and I do the same, that we do get across to the student exactly what we're thinking about when we're doing it as well, because it's not just a series of put this color next to the next color. When you get past that kind of copying stage, so we got, when you got your basic beginner's lesson, they're scared to do it. They bought their supplies. They're scared to sharpen their first pencil. So I've got a few lessons, and I know Colin got lots of lessons that really hold them by the hand to build their confidence. But once you've got that confidence, then what they need to know is, what are we thinking about when we're doing that drawing? We're looking for colors and textures and tones and tonal changes and that little bit of highlight under the eye and, the bounce light. That's where you get up to the next level then. And a lot of artists don't teach that. They just demonstrating, this is how I'm doing this. This is it, just watch it, but not not learning why we're doing those things, and how we can then put in a different background or a different foreground or turn our head slightly and know where the shadow is going to go. And I think when you teach that thinking, what we're thinking about when we're doing it, that's really important, and certainly separates Colin then from the rest when you look at his really detailed video instruction.
That's lovely. Brilliant. Thanks. Thanks, guys, for really comprehensive answers. Let's move on to Amy's question. I'd like to ask Colin if he sees more changes coming in his tutorials with the increased use of pastelmat and other supports increasingly used by pastel artists, and if he feels the tutorials he made using the ombre paper will work with pastelmat or sanded papers without making any adjustments.
No, it's a simple answer to that. You can't hope to say, well, I'm going to use my same system on pastelmat that I've used ombre. You've got to think differently there, because as Jason and I both know, the pastelmat requires more. It requires more pastel. You've got to use more pastel, and you can put light over dark where you can't so easily on the ombre. So you're limited, I would say. And what was the first part?
If you see any more changes coming in your tutorials with the use of increased use of pastel.
Definitely. I would say that's definitely. And over the last few years, I've proved that. Because we're always learning, and I'm sure Jason will agree with me. We never stop learning. And every picture you do, you think, I've picked something up from that. The next picture, I'm going to apply that. And you can do that. And this is how you get to where we get to. And if I thought that I'd gone as far as I'm going to go and I'm never going to get any further, I'd give it up now. There's no point in doing it anymore, because the thrill of being able to produce something different, exceptional, a little bit better than the last one you did, that's where the interest comes in. That's what keeps me going. And I'm sure Jason will agree with me on that.
Yeah, exactly the same. Yeah, 100%.
Lovely. Thanks, Amy, for the question. Moving on to Evie. Hi, Jason. When you made this Tony Stark portrait, did you also start from a blurred photo? Because it's a really different way of working as you do with the fur.
Okay, when I do animals, Colin may not know that sometimes I say to people to put their reference photo, say it's something very, very detailed like a cheetah's head, and I say put your reference photo into an image editor and then just blur it slightly. So you take away all those details, those confusing details, and by blurring, it generally goes slightly darker as well, which is what we want with our first layers, usually in pastelmat. Because a lot of beginners, they'll see all those details and they go for that straight away. Now that kind of works with colored pencil because you've got to plan a lot. But when you're doing pastelmat, I like to blur it, and that helps them along. But when I did one of Tony Stark for my son, I wanted to see how realistic I could get it. And I think with portraits, you need to attack that in more of a precise way. So I just went straight in and went for accuracy and building layers up. Very, very similar to the way Colin does it on the ombre paper. So I wasn't really building many layers. I was going in really accurately with it. And I think that turned out really quite photorealistic. So no, short answer, no, I didn't blur out to start.
It's a really good way of understanding theory around the colors and taking away a layer of perhaps fear initially when you're looking at a picture. Yeah, I think that's a really great tip. Okay, so next one from Alexandra. This looks to be just a lot of lovely words from Alexandra. Colin Bradley was one of the first introductions to using pastel pencils. I still have the 20 years old draw and paint cats with pastel pencils, video and book set, and the same draw and paint set for dogs with pastel pencils. He always got beautiful results, even with using pastel pencils on ombre paper. I just wanted to say thanks for inspiring me to try pastels back then. I was impressed at the layers he achieved and the lifelike results he got on this paper.
That's very kind of him to say that.
Okay. It's very kind of you, Jason, for including that in our list of questions.
I've also got the Drawing Cats and Dogs booklet of Colin's as well from all those years ago, so she's not the only fan.
Oh, that's amazing. Fantastic. Okay, Caitlin. I've watched another artist lay down the complementary colour in an underlayer of watercolour, then laying the finished colour in pastel on top. Have either of you used this approach?
I've not done it, specifically because I almost always use a mid-tone paper with my pastel mat. So I would usually use what pastel mat calls dark grey, which is really a mid-tone, or dark brown. So that's the way I go around that. I don't really do any underpaintings at all, personally.
And I did.
You did.
I did. Well, it
would make sense. It's coming from watercolour.
Well, funny enough, coming back to my favourite artist, John Constable, I made a video of this, actually, exactly the same as that. I did a watercolour wash, and then I overlaid it with pastel. Quite successful.
Yeah.
Could I do it again? No, I wouldn't. There's no point, because since then I've learned that you can use, as Jason said, you can use the pastel to equally as good effect of them. And the other problem with that is when you lay your watercolour, if you're not a competent watercolour artist, you could over apply the watercolour, and therefore it's going to show through the pastel. So I wouldn't do it. I did do it. It was successful-ish, but I wouldn't do it again. So
it's all about learning. I'm learning all the time. I do on pastel mat. You may have seen me do. So say I did a leopard. I'll put the black spots in with black gouache, and that means that when I put my underlayer on, then the black doesn't move and it doesn't muddy and shift position or anything like that. But the texture of the gouache goes into the pastel mat, and it's almost identical to pastel mat. So it'll accept all the pastel layers on top. That's something I learned in the last year or so. So, there's things all the time. I'm always looking for a different way, a different technique that will help me. And then I just share it. It's just, that's the way you go. But I'm always looking to learn something. And I hope in 10 years' time, I can look back on my drawings and my paintings and think I would have done that different. And in fact, I'm only happy with about 3 or 4 of my drawings fully. There's something I do on most of them. There's only about 3 that I think nailed it, out of a couple of 100 where I think I got it right on that one. I wouldn't change anything on that one. But I don't get disappointed with the others at all. I don't drag myself down. That's where I was then. That's the best I could do then on that particular day. And the next day, if I did it again, if I had the motivation to do something again, I would almost always change something every single time.
You say the exact same thing. You say it's the best you can do at that time, and that's what you say to
absolutely.
all of the students as well. So
yeah.